Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Thursday, April 22nd, 8:30 a.m. Project Homekey 2.0 information session. My name is Andrew Henning, and I am the project director with Opening Doors Marin. We have a presentation for you this morning, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So just one sec. Great. So again, I'm Andrew, and this is our 10th and final, Project Homekey 2.0 info session. I was planning to be joined this morning by Ken Shapiro, who is the Chief Assistant Director for Health and Human Services with the county. And Ken may still be joining. In fact, he might have joined right now. I can't see the panelists or the attendees while I'm screen sharing. But anyway, as you can see here, this is my contact information as well as Ken's. I'll make sure to drop this in the chat when I get the chance to respond to the chat again. But if there are any questions you have, comments you want to make, concerns you have that you don't want to express during the presentation today or that come to mind after the fact, feel free to reach out to me or Ken or either of us, and we're happy to field any concerns you might have or questions. So a little bit of housekeeping about today. As I mentioned earlier, this session is being recorded. It's being recorded right now, and it'll be posted online. All 10 sessions are going to be posted online. Following the presentation, we will be answering questions from the chat. So feel free to, if you type questions in the chat while I'm presenting, I'm not going to be able to see them, but if you want to hold them till the end, or, again, stream of conscious, feel free to type them into the chat. And then we'll also have a survey link at the end that you can also provide additional feedback. We are going to be talking a little bit about homelessness in Marin County, but this presentation is primarily about Homekey 2.0. So that's really the focus, is Homekey and what this project's all about. I don't anticipate it at this point, but if we get Zoom bombed or we have some other kind of technical issue, I do have everyone's email address, and I'm happy to, if we need to end the session or it ends, beyond our control, I'm happy to schedule a follow-up with everyone, and I can also send you all the links to the other sessions. And then lastly, I just wanted to flag that the county's put together a really great FAQ information page that's being constantly updated as we learn more about Project Homekey 2.0. It's at marincounty.org/homekey. And you can also just Google Marin County Project Homekey. So with that, the agenda for today is, again, just welcoming you and introductions. Like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about homelessness in the county overall, talk a little bit about opening doors, and then the bulk of the presentation is really about Homekey and your questions about Homekey. So homelessness in Marin. So I just want to caveat that I have a 45-minute version of this presentation. So you're getting the abridged 5-minute version. So again, if you have questions or any kind of comments, I'm happy to field those outside of this meeting, and you can reach out to me and happy to talk. But in a nutshell, over the last 5 years, our systems change process really took place beginning in 2016. And it started with a relatively simple insight, and beyond all the background of why we came to this insight, our core kind of motivating principle was that we realized there was that most of our challenges related to homelessness in Marin County were stemming from a small group of people experiencing chronic homelessness. If you look at the spectrum of people that are temporarily homeless to people that are chronically homeless, the vast majority of people are actually only temporarily homeless for a few weeks, a few months, but they're able to relatively quickly resolve their homelessness. On the other end of the spectrum, people that are chronically homeless, that basically means someone's homeless for a year or longer, and they have some kind of disabling condition that's making it harder for them to resolve their homelessness. That might be a behavioral health issue, substance abuse issue, traumatic brain injury, health issue. And frankly, many times it's actually 2 or 3 issues at the same time. And so both locally in Marin and across the country, we found that the per capita cost for a chronically homeless person to remain homeless annually can be upwards and over $60,000 per year. So that's what I was talking about, really being kind of resource intensive in the community. And at the same time, that's partly, well, not partly, in large part because people experiencing chronic homelessness are some of the most vulnerable people in our community. Studies have found that people experiencing chronic homelessness pass away on average 25 years earlier than their housed peers, not from an acute night of cold, but from chronic, untreated health issues, behavioral health issues, That's really the core challenge. And so based on this, back again 5 years ago, we realized that we had a lot of great programs and services in Marin County, but it wasn't necessarily focused on chronic homelessness. And so because of that, we decided to start hitting the road and trying to find out what other communities were doing to address chronic homelessness. We went up to Sonoma, to the East Bay, San Francisco, down to Santa Clara County. We took our county leaders, our city leaders, electeds, staff, and we were really trying to discover what is it that's driving this kind of change in other communities. And at the same time, locally, we also were engaged in a systems mapping process to really understand the lived experience of people that were chronically homeless in our community. So in this map, the details aren't as important as the kind of overall theme, which is that being homeless is designated in the middle, being housed is on the outside. And as you can see, we created a very convoluted web of services. Again, these are well-intentioned. No one meant to design the system this way, but it was a very convoluted process that wasn't really resulting in people exiting homelessness to housing. And so basically the fundamental cycle at play was, as I talked about earlier, we had a group of people that was inherently difficult to serve because of those underlying disabilities. We had created well-intentioned programs, but they had, again, kind of unforeseen barriers in them. And so people were failing out of those programs. They became more distrustful of the system. They didn't seek help, and then their situation got worse. And in some cases, there were people that had been chronically homeless in Marin County for 20, 30, even 40 years. And so this obviously wasn't working for the community, and it certainly was not working for the person that was experiencing homelessness for that long. So what we realized in all of our tours is that we didn't need just another mental health program or substance abuse treatment program. We needed an entirely new process for recognizing the unique needs of all these individual people. And so in our various tours, we had learned about a program in San Mateo County called the HOT team, or the Homeless Outreach Team, which was really based around bringing together city partners, county partners, service providers to focus on a by name list of the most vulnerable, visible, chronically homeless people in the community, and just focusing almost exclusively on getting them housed. That was the core mission. And so that was something that we decided to pilot here in Marin, and specifically in downtown San Rafael. And it's worth noting that both the San Mateo program and our program have been named a statewide best practice by the League of California Cities. And so really the way that worked was that we started this in 2016, and we met every 2 weeks. This group of providers really focused on how do we get folks that have been, long-term homeless or visible vulnerable, how do we get them housed? And what we realized through all of our additional kind of research and field trips was that compared to the status quo, which I showed you, and that's why I love this graphic, compared to the status quo whereby people were kind of navigating this maze of services, we realized that housing first, or basically taking people directly from the street, putting them into housing units, and then wrapping them in intensive services, is actually 200 to 300% more effective than the status quo kind of treatment first, as it's called. And so as a result of that, over the first 18 months of the Homeless Outreach Team in San Rafael, we housed 23 of the most visible, vulnerable, chronically homeless people. Many folks that we felt like, I don't think we can ever get them back inside again, we successfully housed. So based on that success in 2017, we decided to make this a county-wide strategy. And so I might have just said this, but so on October 1st of 2017, we officially launched what we call coordinated entry, which is our county-wide strategy for addressing homelessness. And there's a lot more information about coordinated entry that I could share, but I would definitely direct you to learn a little bit more about this organization. They're called Community Solutions, and they've launched this national movement called Built for Zero, which is a coalition that includes Marin County of now over 80 communities in the US and Canada that are using this by name list methodology to actively end chronic and veteran homelessness. And there are now communities that have demonstrably ended chronic and veteran homelessness. And so this is really something that helped us have a model for scaling up that HOT team to be community-wide. And so the impact has been that in those first 2 years, 2017 to 2019, we saw an almost 30% reduction in chronic homelessness. And since October 1st of 2017 to date, we've permanently housed over 320 of the most vulnerable chronically homeless people county-wide. This stat's a little bit outdated, but our retention rate for all those people that have been housed is 94%. And the national average for Housing First is about 85%. So 94% is great, and we're still pretty significantly above the national average. And as we originally hypothesized, at least from the data we have from San Rafael as an example, we've seen major reductions in public safety utilization from people that were homeless to then after they were housed. So this has really been great for the people, great for the community. So that really is the next question though. How have we done this? So a huge amount of the credit goes to the Marin Housing Authority, and obviously all of our nonprofit service partners, but the Housing Authority has agreed to basically support this program by prioritizing Section 8 housing vouchers for people that are coming through the coordinated entry system. And the result of that is that we've actually housed hundreds of people in scattered site rental units from Mill Valley to Novato, Corte, Madera, all the way out to Inverness, actually. And so that has been a huge way that we've been able to house people rapidly in our community. But of course, private sector rental units are not going to be totally sufficient to meet the housing need that we have. So we've also been working to try to actually create new units. So Victory Village was a low-income senior housing project in Fairfax that finished last year. And so we were able to carve out some units there, some permanent supportive housing units for our folks. Right now, Homeward Bound and Marin is rebuilding the Mill Street shelter in San Rafael to include 32 additional units of permanent supportive housing, plus rebuilding the original shelter. So these have been great examples, and it's actually a perfect segue to what Opening Doors is. And that's really Opening Doors' mission. So in the early days of this kind of change management process, I mean, it really started in 2016, but in early 2017, we convened a group that we started calling the Marin Chronic Homeless Action Task Force, or MCHAT for short. And basically the goal of MCHAT in the early days was stakeholder education and alignment. So as we were learning about Housing First and Build for Zero and these different modalities for addressing chronic homelessness, we wanted to bring together different city leaders, different county leaders, faith-based community, business community, philanthropy, to try to really educate them about why we were doing this and what was the best strategies for addressing this. And after those 2 years of kind of alignment, we realized that the biggest value add of MCHAT would be around housing and helping to create more housing, and specifically addressing the bottleneck of needing local capital. And what I mean by that is simply having local money that we could use to pursue opportunities. We had come to realize that there are actually a lot of housing opportunities, with creative reuse or adaptive reuse of buildings and other things. We just didn't have the money to pursue them. So in 2019, MCHAT rebranded itself as Opening Doors Marin and became a fiscally sponsored 501c3 nonprofit project under the Center for Volunteer and Nonprofit Leadership here in Marin. And in 2019, we spent almost the entirety of that year exploring the feasibility of a public revenue measure for housing. Some other local communities in the region and the state have passed public revenue measures that have allowed the community to have local capital to pursue housing. And as we learned, and I think we already knew, but in Marin County, we really value having local control over our housing and land use decisions. And so having local monies can really help advance that goal. But unfortunately, there was ultimately not enough political support to pursue this measure. And so in early 2020, Opening Doors shifted to helping to create a community business plan for what it would take in terms of housing and services to end chronic and veteran homelessness. And then the goal was to use that business plan to raise additional private money, regional philanthropy. And that was the plan, at least until COVID. And I'll talk about that here in a minute. If you want to learn more about Opening Doors, we do have a website. It's not always totally up to date, but openingdoorsmarin.org. And then I would also encourage you to check out a similar organization that we've sort of been aspiring to model ourselves after, which is called Destination Home. And Destination Home is also a public-private partnership working to end homelessness that's based in Santa Clara County. And they're probably 10 years ahead of where we are, but they've done a lot of this public revenue work. They've brought a level of kind of accountability and data around homelessness to that community. And they've also been able to raise a lot of money from the tech sector to go towards housing and homelessness. So if you want to learn more, this is an interesting model. So that takes us to Homekey, and back in 2020, I want to pick up that story. So as we all know, COVID and shelter in place began in March of last year. And within a few short weeks of that, the state said, we really need to do something to address the people that are homeless and have these underlying, especially the people that are homeless and have these underlying health vulnerabilities, as I talked about earlier, because the thinking and the fear was if there's a breakout of COVID among the homeless community, then, there could be really dire consequences for people. And so we want to avoid that. So there was a confusingly named predecessor to Project Homekey called Project Roomkey, which was basically an effort to let communities rapidly lease hotels and motel rooms to create what's called non-congregate shelter. Congregate shelter, by comparison, would be like a gymnasium with cots. That's obviously not going to be a good environment for COVID. And thanks to Project Roomkey and the state program, 22,000 people were able to actually get off the street into rapid short-term housing. And almost every city, I shouldn't say city, but almost every county in California, including 3 tribal nations, participated in this. Based on the success of Project Roomkey, within a few short months, and I was joking yesterday with one of the people I was presenting with that 2-month period felt like it was probably a year. Those days were very long, but within a few short months in June, the state announced a new program that they were calling Project Homekey. And so based on Project Roomkey and the ability to rapidly acquire those units, the state said, well, what if we could actually rapidly acquire these units and make them permanent housing? And so they basically repurposed $750 million in federal coronavirus relief funding for this purpose. And after announcing this program in June, the notice of funding availability came out in July, and then applications for Homekey projects were due less than a month later in August. So this was an extremely rapid turnaround. And because it was federal money that was basically use it or lose it, the condition of the funding was that units had to be acquired by the end of the calendar year. So that's super fast. And they had to be operational, at least 50% operational within 90 days. And despite these constraints and the speed across the state, almost 6,000 units were created and over 9,000 people were served. And when you think about the fact that there are 150,000 people that are homeless in California, this made a really significant impact. Locally in Marin, we had 2 successful Project Homekey sites. One was 3301 Kerner, which was a former office building in San Rafael, and that's going to create 44 units of permanent supportive housing. And then the other was the Casa Buena, which was a motel in Corte, Madera. And that site now is going to have 18 permanent supportive housing units plus a unit for a manager. So at this point, I just want to acknowledge that, as I said earlier, this was very fast. If you were to use Victory Village as a comparison, that was a multi-year project that included, drafting designs, community feedback sessions, going to the planning commission, going to the city council. That's the kind of typical process by which we pursue housing in this community. We did not have the chance to do that with Project Homekey. And because of that, understandably, there was some concern and trepidation from communities where Project Homekey sites were proposed. Is this a good idea? How's this going to work? And so I really want to give a shout out to the town of Corte Madera because following the acquisition of the Casa Buena, they have formed a community advisory group, which Opening Doors is actually helping to facilitate. And that group is looking at things like, how do we improve communication with the community? How do we have successful evaluation and success metrics for this site? What kind of exterior redesigns can we implement to make sure that the project is a good integration in the community? And also, how can community members get involved and help? And so I wanted to show this short video to you. It's a virtual ribbon cutting video that this group put together. And I think it really shows you how this program and this project have really been embraced by the community. So I'm gonna play this short video for you now.
On behalf of Corte Madera's elected officials, staff, and residents, I'd like to welcome you to the Casa Buena, Corte Madera's first permanent supportive housing for those that experience homelessness. This was all brought together by a collaborative effort that included the County of Marin, Catholic Charities, Open Door Marin, town staff, and Corte Madera residents, who are also providing monetary and in-kind donations.
Marin has worked very hard over the past 3 years to address our homeless population. And with the Homekey project in Corte Madera at Casa Buena, we will be able to provide needed housing for 18 of our most vulnerable residents while wrapping all the services the county has to offer around them. I want to thank the community of Corte Madera, their city council, and the Casa Buena Steering Committee for working with the county to make this possible.
When I first heard of plans to build a homeless shelter in Corte Madera, I was very much opposed to it. It wasn't until I did a bunch of research on my own that I began to realize that permanent supportive housing can be an important solution to the homeless issue we have here in Marin County.
A safe home helps transform lives and creates essential stability, healing, independence, and dignity founded on hope. Our partnership with Marin County through Project Homekey and Homekey impacts many lives. Together, we strive to end homelessness in Marin.
From Corte Madera to Novato, Larkspur to Inverness, we have successfully housed hundreds of our community's most vulnerable chronically homeless people. Because of projects like this and the support of community members like you, I know we can reach our goal of being the first county in the Bay Area to end chronic homelessness.
One of the ideas we had was to create welcome baskets that could be given to each new resident when they move in. So we sent people shopping for everything from toothpaste to shampoo to snacks, cozy slippers, and grocery store gift cards. And the response from the community was frankly overwhelming. So many people wanted to be a part of this. It really embodies the spirit of Corte Madera as a welcoming place.
So on behalf of Corte Madera, I'd like to welcome our newest residents.
Welcome to Corte Madera!
So as you can see, this has really been a model and a program that has been embraced by the community. And I don't think Scott would mind me saying this, I've been saying in these presentations, but you know, as he acknowledged in the video, he was someone that was concerned about this project and he had reservations about whether or not this was a good idea. And through his own research and now being involved with the committee, has really seen that, you know, we have a good strategy for addressing homelessness in Marin. We have that supportive service system in place. And these projects really can make a big difference in people's lives. And that committee now, you know, we're hoping that this model could serve as a basis or a template for other Homekey projects in the future, and even a national model perhaps for how to really embrace a permanent supportive housing project in a community. So Homekey 2.0. So it's important to note that there actually is no official Homekey 2.0 yet. At this point, all we know is that the governor has proposed $750 million for a possible Homekey 2.0. The legislature has not taken action on this budget proposal yet, but we are thinking that they could act as early as next month in May. And given the rapid turnaround of Homekey 1.0, we think that as soon as the legislature passes this, we want to be prepared that a NOFA could come out, or a notice of funding availability. Because there is no Homekey 2.0 yet officially, we don't know exactly what the programmatic guidelines are going to be. We're assuming it's like 1.0. But basically, because of that, last time, as I said, it happened so quickly that we were kind of on our heels. And so this time, these info sessions, we're really trying to get out in front of this to better identify projects and to get the community involved and to get community feedback. So based on what we know from last time, at least, cities, counties, housing authorities, tribal governments even need to be the lead applicant for a Project Homekey application. That doesn't mean there can't be other partners. In fact, I think the state encourages other partners, such as social service providers, nonprofit developers, for-profit developers even, and even cities and counties could hypothetically partner together and be co-applicants. So that's basically who can apply. the funding, like last time, we're expecting to be flexible for acquisition conversion. So that could be acquiring hotels, motels, commercial buildings. We also saw that some communities last time were able to purchase like tiny home, trailer, kind of modular type units that were designed to be eventually long-term permanent housing. So that's an option as well. Like last time, we're expecting that we're going to have to close on any possible projects by the end of the calendar year, and that those projects will be at least will need to be at least 50% occupied within 90 days of acquisition. And I haven't talked about this yet, but the other aspect of this program is that there is a local funding match requirement, and that's actually really important. And so I wanted to break it out and talk to you a little bit more about that. So basically, the way to think about the Homekey subsidy is that it's on a per unit acquisition basis. So for a per unit acquisition amount up to $100,000, the state fully covers that up to $100,000. For when you get into $100,000 to $200,000, it becomes a one-to-one match. So 50 from the state, 50,000 from the state, 50,000 locally. And then from 200,000 to 350,000, it becomes a 1-to-2 match. So 50,000 from the state, 100,000 locally. So the max kind of maxing out the subsidy is basically a project that's $350,000, and the state would be covering 200,000 per unit, and the local community would be covering 150. There could be projects that are more than 350 per unit, but at that point, the additional, marginal increase is 100% on the local community. And to really put this into context of what this means, if you imagined a 50-unit project that, let's say, was costing $200,000 per unit, the state would contribute $150,000 per unit, or $7.5 million. We would contribute $50,000 per unit, or $2.5 million. If that project increased by just $90,000 per unit, our local contribution would go up to $110,000 per unit, or $5.5 million. And so I think what's important about this is, as I said earlier, the whole genesis of Opening Doors Marin is that we don't have a lot of local capital for housing. And so that's why the Homekey funding is so important, because that's a lot of money from the state. And it's also why the per unit cost is important for us, because that difference from $2.5 million to $5.5 million is dramatic. And so that's just something we have to be mindful of. So in terms of our added kind of local criteria, there are some factors that we're considering, and this is something that we're open to getting feedback on from the community. The first is that we're not looking for projects that are in areas of concentrated poverty. And what do I mean by that? Basically, those are communities like the Canal or Marin City, where there's a concentration of low-income households. And the reason for that is twofold. One is, just I think, morally, ethically, we're trying to make sure that housing in our community, affordable housing, is equitably distributed. We don't want to crowd, lower income housing into already low income neighborhoods. We want to make sure that people have an opportunity to live in integrated communities throughout the county. So that's number one. Number two is also operational. The federal government recognizes this dynamic as well. And the Housing Authority is not actually allowed to issue housing vouchers for construction in areas of concentrated poverty. So earlier I talked about how we had a lot of people that were getting Section 8 vouchers for rentals throughout the county. If you're assigned a Section 8 voucher as an individual, you can rent wherever you want. But in terms of financing affordable housing, one common strategy is to take housing vouchers, and then rather than assigning them to a person, you assign them to a room in a project. And that's called project basing. And so that doesn't mean, both for private rentals and for project basing, that's not free housing. What it means is that 30% of a person's income, whatever that income is, goes to their housing. And then the voucher or the subsidy covers the remaining cost up to market rent. And what's important about that is that when we create these projects, that subsidization helps cover the cost of operations. So that would be like property management, maintenance, and repair. It could even include security costs. And it also helps pay for services. So having the vouchers with a project is extremely important for long-term sustainable financing. So that's why we really want to make sure we're pursuing projects that could eventually get housing vouchers. Similarly, again, this is kind of just more of I think like a principled position. is that we're not trying to have all of our Homekey projects in one community. We really want to have a portfolio of projects throughout the county. So that's number 2. And then also tying back to the financing, what's important about the Homekey funding is that it's for acquisition. There's a little bit of flexibility around some maybe initial small rehab, or even, like I said earlier, acquiring modular units or trailers or things like that as part of the initial acquisition. But by example, 3301 Kerner was a commercial building, and it's going to need significant rehab to actually turn it into housing units. Homekey does not pay for that. And so one of the ways that we can finance that rehab on the back end is with something called low-income tax credits, which are a affordable housing source that nonprofit developers are able to utilize to help pay for that rehab. And so based on our partnerships with various nonprofit developers, we know that they have their own cost structure. And so for them, they really need to try to pursue projects that are 45 units or more. And I don't want to just say that that's a hard and fast rule, because there could be projects that are a lot smaller. But again, it's kind of on a project by project basis. So I don't want to just, again, say hard and fast 45 or above, but that is more of what we're looking for, especially where rehab is involved. And then also based on the subsidy kind of breakdown that I shared on the last slide, we're looking for projects that are less than $350,000 per unit, and ideally less than 250. That's really the goal. And then lastly, we don't want projects that are in the middle of nowhere. We want to make sure we're trying to find sites that are connected to groceries and transit, healthcare, and other services. And that's actually something that the state had asked about in the application for Homekey 1.0. So it's something that actually also carries weight in the Homekey application. So in terms of next steps, this is the 10th and final info session, so a big milestone. All of these sessions are going to be recorded, and I'm going to send you the recordings later this morning so that you can watch any of the sessions if you're interested, including this one. The county is also in the process of finalizing what's called a request for interest. So that's a formal solicitation that goes out to property owners throughout the county to see if they're interested in participating. We're trying to get community feedback, and I'll talk about that in a minute, to again, really kind of refine the type of projects that we're trying to pursue. And as we refine that criteria and as projects come in, we're working with local nonprofit developers, like I talked about, and funders to really decide, what projects are actually viable. There's a lot of due diligence that needs to go into these sites. Like, again, is it actually for sale? How much? How many units can we get? Can it be occupied on the right timeline? So that's all kind of due diligence that needs to take place before an application is submitted. But like I said earlier, we don't know when the application period is going to open. It could be next month. It could be June. It could be July. We're just trying to get prepared as possible. So I'm going to share a survey link in the chat in a moment. I'll put the link up here if you want to try to quickly type it up. But basically, we're looking for your feedback on the criteria that I've shared so far. And then also, what are things that get you excited about a Homekey site? What are things that make you concerned? And then if you have actual ideas for a project, we'd love to hear that too. So with that actually concludes the presentation. I appreciate you listening, and I'm going to stop screen sharing here. And great, we had a lot of people join while I was sharing. And we actually have 2 of my colleagues from the county, so I'm going to promote both of them. This is the best tag team that we've had yet. And let me make sure that they're able to share video. 1 second, everyone, as I do this. Ken and Carrie have both joined us. Anything you all want to add? I'm going to pull up the link to the survey, but anything you all want to add that I might have missed, or anything you want to share from the county perspective?
I think it was a great presentation as always.
And I'm sorry that I'm joining late. I apologize, Andrew, for leaving you hanging at the beginning.
No problem. We had some technical issues yesterday. That was much harder to navigate. So this is all good. So I just dropped in the chat the link to the survey. I'm also going to drop my email address. Opening doors, Marin. And then maybe Carrie and Ken, do you want to also add your emails to the chat just so people have it? Sorry, I'm trying to type and talk. So yeah, so at this point, any questions, anything anyone wants to share, you can either type it directly into the chat, or you can also use the Q&A function if you see that at the bottom of the Zoom panel. And as people are maybe typing or adding thoughts, one consistent question that's come up many times at these presentations has been, this was great. I want to stay involved. I want to get involved. What's kind of next? So as I said, as soon as this is over, I'm going to upload this video to YouTube. We've got all 10 of the info sessions up. I'm going to send you the slides. I'll send you a link to the survey. I'll send you a link to the county FAQ page. And so if there's anyone that would have wanted to attend this and couldn't, feel free to share that information. Feel free to forward the survey. Even if people didn't attend these info sessions, they can still complete the survey. So would definitely really love your help getting the word out. Not seeing anything. Hopefully, maybe that means we fielded all your questions. Anything else, maybe Carrie or Ken, that you heard in other presentations that is worth noting? Or one thing I think is important to add is, I didn't go into too much detail, but did one of you want to talk just briefly about, I think, the highly correlated nature of all the people that we've been housing through our chronic homeless focus and the increase in our permanent supportive housing. I think that's a really interesting number.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think some of you may know that Marin, when in 2019 was the last time we did our full point in time count, which is where we go out in the streets and count everybody experiencing homelessness in Marin. And we were one of the only counties in the Bay Area and in California that saw a decrease between 2017 and 2019. And in particular, we saw a huge decrease. It was only a 7% increase or decrease overall. We saw a 28% decrease in our chronically homeless population. And we really credit that to the enormous number of new permanent supportive housing units that we've gotten launched. So I don't know, I don't have the numbers exactly in front of me, but basically we tripled our housing stock from under 200 units in 2015 to nearly 600 units now. And so that really, I think, obviously it's a very multi-factor issue, and there's all sorts of things that I'm sure went into that decrease. But I think the fact that we, did have that enormous increase in housing, which, as Andrew discussed, that's how you end people's homelessness, is you get them housed. That really, being able to bring on all those new units is, I would say, the primary reason that we saw that decrease, and that's what Homekey could allow us to continue, is to really create a bunch of new units of permanent supportive housing, which would let us bring down that number even further.
That's great.
And I'll just add, I do have the numbers, so I'll read them. So in 2015, our system in Marin had 193 units of permanent supportive housing. In January of 2020, so that's right before COVID hit us, we were at 514 units. We've added 75 since, and today we have 589 units of permanent supportive housing. That's from 193 to 589 in a matter of 6 years. And it really is, I think it is worthwhile to oversimplify it. The only way to end someone's homelessness is to get them into a home. And the only way we're doing that for many of the folks who are experiencing chronic homelessness is to create a permanent supportive housing unit. And Homekey is a way that we can make massive, quick jumps in the number of units available to those folks in our community who need those units.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So we did get a question that came into the panelists. So I'll just read this verbatim. It seems in Novato that the homeless housing effort is newly focused on 2 locations which are highly valued by the overall community, i.e. in Marin and Lee Gerner Park. Why are these locations with deep community roots the only ones we hear of as being looked at by Homekey and other advocates? Why don't I go first, and I'll talk about in Marin in particular. So I mentioned earlier that we had 2 successful Project Homekey sites in Marin County in the first round, the 3301 Kerner and the Casa Buena. there were actually 3 projects that we applied for. The third was in Marin and Novato. So the basis for that was, I mentioned that the county is in the process of finalizing what's called request for interest. And so last time in Project Homekey 1.0, there was an RFI that went out similarly to hotel and motel owners to see if they were interested in selling. And there was a response from Marin that they wanted to possibly sell that site for this program. And so ultimately, as I talked about, the financing of these is very important. And so the financing wasn't able to work out for that site, but that's why Marin was considered the first time. Right now, I don't want to say that site's being targeted, because at least from what I've seen, I haven't seen anything that site's been expressed as a Homekey 2.0 possibility. That's not to say it couldn't, but that's not something that's being actively targeted by the Homekey effort. So I just want to make that clear. And then I'm happy to speak about Lee Gerner, but maybe Ken or Carrie, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that there are these sort of 2 locations brought up, because they come up for very different reasons, right? Like in Marin was brought up as a potential housing site, as sort of a solution, as a place to bring people off of the streets and get them permanently housed. The reason Lee Gerner Park is in the front of people's people's minds is not that it's being proposed as a housing site. It's because an encampment is formed there. And, you know, I think, I don't think there's any plan. I can say with pretty much certainty that there is not a plan to turn Lee Gerner Park into permanent supportive housing. That wouldn't, you know, we'd have to, even if we wanted to do that, we'd have to construct a building there, and that's not an eligible Homekey cost. But what Homekey does is Homekey allows us to create permanent supportive housing units that allow us to bring people off of the street and out of encampments. And so, you know, if people are concerned about the encampment in Lee Gerner Park, which I absolutely understand being concerned about that, the way to get people out of that encampment is to get them into housing. And so that might be, you know, permanent supportive housing with Homekey. That might be a rapid rehousing program if somebody's just, you know, they've maybe recently become homeless and just needed a place to go. And so they heard about this encampment and set up there. So I think there are, you know, the reason we hear about these things the most is because, as you said, they have deep community roots. So if somebody's camping, you know, out in the hills and nobody knows they're there, we're not going to hear about that because nobody's even noticing them. Whereas when there's an encampment in a really central location, that's what drives that concern and what brings it to the front of the conversation.
Absolutely. And I'll also add, just as kind of an aside, that Opening Doors Marin, one of our work streams, and I'm going to say this because I see one of my colleagues from that team has attended. We also have another kind of work stream where we're trying to work potentially with faith-based communities to pursue things like tiny homes or other kind of modular units on a small scale, kind of creating like a little community. And there are examples all across the country of communities that have created these kind of smaller type of tiny home villages or other programs. Seattle's got some, I think they have 12 sites ranging in size from 12 to 60 units on site. So I think, you know, that could always be an option for people that want to live in that kind of communal setting. And we're trying to find potential faith-based partners or other community partners where we can make that happen. So yeah, great question. Any other questions? I haven't seen anything else come in. And that's okay. Many of our sessions actually ended around the 45-minute mark. So and then there was just a follow-up about a potential reapplication of Homekey 2.0 for Marin. Again, I don't want to say like that's impossible. You know, anything's always possible. But at this point, you know, I think our process is that we would want to it's basically inbound interest from property sellers. That's really the key. Homekey does not allow us to go out and say, you know, the city, the county, the housing authority, we want this property and we're going to buy it from you. It's not like an eminent domain type of situation. It requires a willing seller. So that really would be the key, is if that seller expressed interest again. And again, at least at this point, I've not seen that.
And just because the questions are specific to Novato at the moment, just want to let folks know, unless you did before I got on, Andrew, that I think yourself and someone from our team will be at the city council meeting this coming Tuesday evening as well to present, probably similar to what we're presenting tonight, but there'll be to the city council, so the council will be able to ask specific questions of the panel.
Yeah, thanks for adding that. Yeah, that'd be a great opportunity to talk more about this. Okay, great. Well, I think that looks like it might be it. Here we go. Yeah, just some positive feedback and that it was an informative presentation. So thanks for sharing that, Ellen. And yeah, so again, if you have any other questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us. Our emails were in the chat. Andrew at openingdoorsmarin.org, C. Sager, S-A-G-E-R at Marin County, or Ken Shapiro, K. Shapiro at marincounty.org. So feel free to reach out to any of us. And again, I'll be sending out the follow-up information probably within the next hour, actually. So keep an eye out for that. So thanks, everyone. Thanks, Ken and Carrie. And everyone, please take care. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.